She thought I was nothing, until I owned the ground she stood on. Her name was Bethany Burns. She was 31 years old, and she had spent most of her life feeling invisible. Born in the quiet market town of Littleford in the English countryside, Bethany grew up overshadowed by her older brother Garrett, the golden boy of the family. While Garrett was the son who could do no wrong, Bethany was the one who never quite measured up. Their mother, Patricia, made it clear without words that Garrett was the family's masterpiece, and Bethany was merely an afterthought, a rough draft never quite finished. With a heart bruised by constant comparison and a soul longing for recognition, Bethany left Littleford at 18, determined to forge a life far from the narrow expectations of her family. She started at the bottom, cleaning rooms in a boutique London hotel, scraping by on modest wages and long hours. It was grueling and humbling work, but Bethany was nothing if not stubborn. She learned the industry inside out, rising through the ranks quietly, unnoticed by the family she left behind. By 31, she was the proud owner of Birch Hospitality, a thriving chain of boutique hotels across the country, with the Monarch Hotel in London as her flagship. Yet none of her family, especially Garrett or Patricia, knew this. To them, she was still the struggling country girl who never quite found her place. Tonight, Bethany was attending an engagement party at the Monarch Hotel, her hotel, the very building she had bought and built up over the years. The engagement was for Garrett and his fiancée, Sloane Whitmore, a woman from a wealthy London family who, Bethany suspected, looked down on her as much as her own family had. The invitation had come late, a last-minute gesture likely orchestrated by Patricia to present a perfect family image to her social circle. Bethany almost didn't come, but something inside her, a mix of curiosity and quiet defiance, pulled her through the heavy oak doors of her own hotel. As she entered the grand ballroom, she caught the sharp whisper that set the tone for the evening. Sloane Whitmore, standing confidently with a glass of champagne in hand, leaned toward her bridesmaids and said, loud enough for Bethany to hear, "Oh, brilliant! The stinky country girl's here." The bridesmaids giggled cruelly, their designer dresses rustling like a pack of hyenas. Sloane didn't even glance at Bethany. She simply dismissed her as an unwelcome stain on her perfect night. What Sloane didn't know, and what no one in that room realized, was that Bethany owned every inch of the Monarch Hotel, the chandeliers gleaming above their heads, the polished silver cutlery in their hands, the marble floors beneath their expensive shoes were all hers. And that whisper, that careless insult, was about to cost Sloane everything she ever dreamed of. The engagement party was everything Bethany expected, extravagant, ostentatious, designed to impress the already impressed. Ice sculptures of swans adorned the edges of the room, a champagne fountain bubbled excessively, and the floral arrangements threatened to outshine the grandeur of the hotel itself. Bethany, in her understated jeans and boots, moved quietly to a corner, observing the scene with a steady gaze. It wasn't long before her mother found her, Patricia Burns approaching like a queen inspecting a blemish on her crown. Her eyes flicked down to Bethany's boots with thinly veiled disdain. "It's nice you made it," she said, the words dripping with condescension. "Though perhaps next time you could dress a little more appropriately. The Whitmores are very refined, you know." Bethany replied calmly that she had come straight from work, a truth that didn't impress her mother in the slightest. Patricia sighed as if Bethany's very presence was a burden she had learned to tolerate rather than a daughter she wanted to embrace. The familiar sting of rejection settled over Bethany like a thick fog. She was 12 years old again, failing invisible tests she'd never been told about. Her eyes drifted back across the room to Sloane, who was busy air-kissing guests with the practiced ease of a socialite born to the role. Sloane's parents, Franklin and Delilah Whitmore, hovered nearby like proud peacocks, their wealth and status on full display. Yet Bethany sensed something off, an unease beneath the polished surface, like a perfect portrait hung slightly askew. Garrett finally noticed her and made his way over, his expression half-hearted, the brother who had never quite seen her as an equal. He mentioned Sloane's generosity, how Patricia had given her grandmother's necklace as an engagement present. Bethany's breath caught. That necklace, an antique pendant promised to her by their grandmother before she died, was now draped around Sloane's neck. Her inheritance, her memory, stolen right before her eyes, and not a soul in the room seemed to notice. Bethany excused herself, retreating to the hallway to gather her thoughts. There, she overheard Franklin Whitmore on the phone, his voice strained with urgency. "We need this wedding to go ahead," he said. "The Burns family has money to cover us. We just need to get through tonight." The mention of money sent a chill down Bethany's spine. What money? Her family had no fortune. She alone had been secretly sending anonymous payments to keep the mortgage paid and the bills covered. Her mother believed Garrett was the benefactor. The Whitmores had done their research and mistaken her brother for the family's financial backbone. With new purpose, Bethany reached out to Wesley Crane, her trusted general manager, and asked him to dig deeper into the Whitmore family's background. Wesley's silent nod was all the encouragement she needed. Meanwhile, Sloane confronted Bethany later, her sweet smile replaced by venom. "Why send money to a family that doesn't even like you?" Sloane sneered. "Garrett told me all about your jealousy. Nobody will miss you." She called her dead weight, a stinky country girl who should stay away. Bethany smiled coldly inside. If arrogance could burn calories, Sloane would be invisible. Then Wesley handed her a folder filled with damning evidence, court filings, financial records, news articles exposing the Whitmores as fraudsters on the brink of collapse. The wedding was a desperate escape plan, a con to secure a place to hide once their empire crumbled. As Bethany pieced together the truth, her resolve hardened. This was her moment. Quietly, methodically, she prepared to expose the Whitmores and protect her family from ruin. The con artists thought they had found easy prey, but they had no idea the quiet country girl was the one holding all the cards. At 9 o'clock sharp, as Franklin Whitmore took the stage to toast the happy couple, Bethany gave Wesley the signal. The screens flickered to life with the damning evidence, shattering the facade of wealth and respectability. The crowd gasped, Sloane's mask crumbled, and Garrett's world shattered before their eyes. The Whitmores were arrested moments later, their decades-long con unmasked. Bethany stepped into the spotlight, the stinky country girl no more, but the woman who owned the ground she stood on. Her family's secrets laid bare, her inheritance reclaimed, and her place finally acknowledged. The night ended not with celebration, but with the quiet triumph of justice served. 3 weeks later, Bethany sat in her office at the Monarch Hotel, the headlines still framed on the wall. Garrett had begun to understand, and their fractured family slowly started to heal. Bethany launched a scholarship for young women like herself, those overlooked, underestimated, but fiercely determined. As she watched guests flow through the hotel she owned, Bethany smiled quietly. People had tried to make her small, but while they looked down, she had been rising all along. The stinky country girl had come home. The grand ballroom shimmered with crystal chandeliers and polished silver, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and freshly cut flowers. Bethany stood near the entrance, quietly observing the scene that was supposed to be her brother Garrett's celebration and Sloane Whitmore's moment of triumph. But for Bethany, it was something else entirely, a stage set for humiliation and betrayal. Sloane, with her perfectly coiffed hair and tailored dress, moved effortlessly among the guests, her laughter tinkling like a bell yet carrying a sharp edge. She was the embodiment of everything Bethany had been taught to envy and despise in her youth, privilege, poise, and the unshakable confidence of someone born into wealth. Sloane's bridesmaids followed her like shadows, their hushed giggles and pointed glances directed at Bethany like knives. The whispered insult from earlier, the stinky country girl comment, still echoed sharply in Bethany's mind, a cruel reminder that she was an outsider in her own hotel. The party was a spectacle of excess. Ice sculptures shaped like swans gleamed under the lights, and a towering champagne fountain bubbled endlessly. Guests mingled with glasses of vintage fizz, their conversations full of name-dropping and polite flattery. Yet beneath the surface, Bethany detected something brittle, a thin veneer stretched too tight over deeper faults. Her mother, Patricia, soon found her, approaching with the practiced air of a socialite who had spotted a problem in the decor. Patricia's eyes swept over Bethany's simple jeans and boots with unmistakable disdain. "It's good you could make it," she said, voice laden with unspoken criticism. "Though next time, perhaps something a little more fitting. You know the Whitmores are very refined." The word refined was delivered like a lesson Bethany should have learned long ago. Bethany met her mother's gaze steadily. "I came straight from work," she said simply, choosing not to reveal that her work was running a multi-million-pound hotel business. Patricia's sigh was a familiar rebuke, the same one she'd given Bethany countless times in her youth. "Do try to make a good impression," Patricia added, before melting back into the crowd, leaving Bethany feeling small and dismissed. Across the room, Sloane was performing her social dance with effortless grace, planting air kisses on cheeks and flashing practiced smiles. Her parents, Franklin and Delilah Whitmore, watched approvingly, their expensive jewelry catching the light with every subtle gesture. Franklin's red-faced, boisterous charm and Delilah's slender, polished elegance screamed wealth and status. But Bethany sensed a tension beneath their perfect facades, a crack in the Whitmore image. Garrett approached Bethany then, his expression polite but distant. "Glad you could make it," he said, as if it was a courtesy rather than a genuine welcome. He spoke warmly about Sloane, calling her amazing and perfect for the family. Bethany listened quietly, keeping her thoughts to herself. Garrett's gaze flicked past her, already searching for other guests to greet. Some things, it seemed, truly never changed. Then Garrett mentioned the engagement gift, their grandmother's antique necklace, now worn by Sloane. Bethany's stomach tightened. That necklace had been promised to her by their grandmother, a symbol of hope and legacy. Their mother had been in the room when the promise was made, yet she had given it away without hesitation. And there it was, shimmering around Sloane's neck, a cold mockery of Bethany's inheritance and memory. The music swelled, making the walls hum, and Bethany excused herself, retreating to the quieter hallway. She needed a moment to breathe, to gather her thoughts away from the biting whispers and forced smiles. As she passed the service corridor, she almost collided with Franklin Whitmore, who was deep in a tense phone conversation. Bethany caught fragments of his words. "We need this wedding. The Burns family has the money. Just get through tonight." Franklin's face was tight with stress, his easy smile slipping as he ended the call and returned to the party. The casual mention of money sent a shiver down Bethany's spine. What money? Her family had no fortune. She alone had been quietly supporting them from afar, sending payments to cover bills and mortgages without recognition or thanks. The Whitmores had clearly done their homework and mistaken Garrett for the Burns family's financial pillar. The knowledge settled over Bethany like a weight. The Whitmores weren't just snobs, they were predators, circling a family they believed wealthy, ready to take what they could before disappearing. But they had no idea they had chosen the wrong target. With her resolve hardening, Bethany sought out Wesley Crane, her trusted general manager, and quietly asked him to find any information he could on the Whitmore family. Wesley's nod was subtle but firm, his usual calm giving way to concern. Bethany knew he would deliver. As she returned to the ballroom, Sloane appeared beside her like a shadow, her smile suddenly cold and sharp. "I know all about you," Sloane whispered, her voice dripping with venom. "You send money home every month pretending you care. But why would someone who can barely afford a flat waste money on a family that doesn't even like them? You're pathetic." Sloane leaned close, eyes glittering with cruel satisfaction. "Garrett told me everything. Your jealousy, your place as the family's unwanted burden. You should just stay away. Nobody will miss you." Bethany's jaw clenched, but her face remained calm. Sloane's words only fueled the fire inside her. This was the moment the quiet country girl had been waiting for, the first real crack in the perfect facade. Sloane thought she was weak and invisible. She was about to learn just how deadly patience could be. Bethany stood frozen for a heartbeat, then forced a calm smile, masking the storm swirling inside. Sloane's words were like poison, meant to sting and belittle, but Bethany had spent a lifetime building a thick skin. She had learned early on that the most dangerous weapon wasn't loud defiance, but quiet endurance, and when the time was right, a calculated strike. Sloane had no idea who she was really facing. Before Bethany could reply, Wesley Crane appeared beside her, his face pale and serious. He handed her a thick folder, his usual composure shaken for the first time that night. "You need to see this," he said quietly. Bethany slipped away to a shadowed corner of the hallway and opened the folder. Inside were the damning documents she hadn't expected to find. Court filings, financial statements, news articles, all pointing to a web of deceit surrounding the Whitmore family. They weren't just wealthy socialites, they were con artists on the brink of collapse. The evidence painted a clear picture. Franklin and Delilah Whitmore had been running a classic Ponzi scheme for years, collecting money from investors for property developments that either didn't exist or were grossly overvalued. Early investors had been paid off with funds from later ones, a house of cards built on lies and greed. The whole empire was moments from falling apart, with federal investigators circling and lawsuits piling up. Bethany's breath caught as she realized the full scale of the deception. The entire engagement was a calculated move, a way to marry into a family they believed had money, a way to shore up their crumbling reputation or find a safe haven when the law caught up with them. But they had made a critical miscalculation. The Burns family wasn't the golden goose they thought it was. There was no secret fortune, no hidden wealth, only Bethany's quiet sacrifices, invisible to all but herself. Her mind raced as she connected the dots. For 4 years, she had been sending anonymous payments to keep the family afloat, mortgage bills, utilities, medical expenses, while her mother took credit for Garrett's supposed generosity. The Whitmores had seized on the illusion of wealth Patricia projected, and now they were exploiting it. Back in the ballroom, the party continued under the glittering chandeliers, unaware that the woman they dismissed was quietly unraveling their entire world. Bethany's anger simmered beneath her calm exterior, fueled not just by the betrayal of a stranger, but by the years of being overlooked and underestimated by her own family. She returned to the party with a new resolve, determined to expose the Whitmores for the frauds they were and to protect the family she loved, however complicated that love might be. Her quiet vengeance was no longer just a distant dream. It was a plan taking shape, sharp and inevitable. As the evening wore on, Bethany's thoughts were interrupted by a message from her lawyer, Rebecca Thornton, confirming the authenticity of the documents and promising swift legal action. Another call from Naomi Delaney, a forensic accountant, brought an even darker revelation. The Whitmores had operated under multiple aliases, weaving their con across the country for over a decade. The woman standing in Sloane Whitmore's place wasn't Sloane at all. Her real name was Sandra Williams, a seasoned fraudster with a history of deception and a trail of ruined lives behind her. Franklin and Delilah were partners in the scheme, living a lie as carefully constructed as their lavish parties. Bethany's lips curled into a bitter smile. The stinky country girl had stumbled upon a secret that would bring down a kingdom built on lies. Suddenly, Sloane reappeared, her expression a mask of false sweetness. She suggested they talk privately, a thinly veiled attempt to intimidate or manipulate. Bethany agreed, following Sloane to a quiet corner near the restrooms. Once out of earshot, Sloane's mask dropped. "You don't belong here," she hissed. "You're a joke. I'm going to marry Garrett and leave you behind. Nobody will miss you." She leaned in, voice low and cruel. "You're dead weight. Just stay away." Bethany met her gaze steadily. Inside, the fire was burning brighter than ever. Sloane had made a grave mistake, underestimating the quiet strength of the woman standing before her. As Sloane walked away, Bethany turned her attention back to the folder in her hands and the storm it promised to unleash. The night was far from over, and the quiet country girl was ready to make them all pay. The ballroom continued to buzz with laughter and clinking glasses, oblivious to the storm brewing just beyond the polished surface. Bethany returned to the party's heart, her mind racing with the revelations she had uncovered. Sloane's cruel dismissal still echoed, But now it fueled a quiet resolve that settled deep within her bones. No longer the invisible sister, no longer the stinky country girl, Bethany was ready to reclaim her place and expose the dark truth lurking beneath the glittering facade. Wesley Crane met her near the service entrance, his eyes sharp with anticipation. "Everything's in place," he whispered, handing her a USB drive containing scanned copies of the damning documents, photographs, and court records. "We're ready when you are." Bethany nodded, feeling a surge of control she hadn't experienced in years. The Whitmores had assumed they were untouchable, that their web of lies would never unravel. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. As the clock edged closer to 9, Franklin Whitmore prepared to make his grand toast. Bethany slipped into the shadows, positioning herself where she could watch everything unfold without drawing attention. Sloane was once again the picture of poised confidence, her smile still fixed, but her eyes flickering with a hint of unease. Garrett stood beside her, playing the perfect fiancé, unaware of the bombshell about to drop. The lights dimmed slightly as Franklin took the stage, adjusting his tie and straightening his jacket. The DJ lowered the music, and the room turned attentive, glasses raised in anticipation. Franklin's voice rang out, smooth and rehearsed, as he spoke of family, legacy, and the bright future joining the Whitmores and Burns families promised. Bethany's heart pounded as the screens behind Franklin's back flickered to life. For a moment, the crowd murmured, assuming it was a technical glitch. Then the images shifted, revealing official court documents stamped with seals, dated filings accusing the Whitmores of fraud and conspiracy. A hush fell over the room, broken only by gasps and whispered questions. Franklin's confident smile froze, his face draining of color as the evidence played out for all to see. The documents detailed years of deceit, financial manipulation, and a sprawling Ponzi scheme that had devastated countless investors. The screen changed again, showing photographs of a younger Sandra Williams, Sloane's real identity, standing beside Franklin and Delilah at charity events under different names. The truth was undeniable, and the polished veneer of the Whitmore family shattered in real time. Sloane stood rooted to the spot, her champagne glass trembling in her hand. Panic flickered across her face as she realized the carefully constructed life she had built was crumbling before her eyes. Garrett's expression shifted from confusion to dawning horror as the pieces clicked together in his mind. Franklin attempted to speak, to dismiss the revelations as errors or technical faults, but the damage was done. 2 security guards stepped forward, blocking his path as he tried to flee. Delilah clung to his arm, whispering frantic reassurances, but the weight of the exposure was crushing. Bethany emerged from the crowd, her boots clicking confidently on the marble floor. All eyes turned to her, the stinky country girl, the invisible sister, now standing at the center of attention. Wesley's voice came over the speakers, calm and authoritative, announcing her as the owner of the Monarch Hotel and CEO of Birch Hospitality. The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia's face went pale. Garrett's jaw dropped open. Even Sloane looked stunned. Bethany took the microphone from Franklin's limp grasp and addressed the crowd with quiet certainty. "Good evening," she began, her voice steady. "I apologize for the interruption, but I believe you deserve to know the truth behind the smiles and celebrations tonight. Franklin and Delilah Whitmore are not who they claim to be. Their real estate empire is a fraud, built on stolen money and broken promises. And the woman you know as Sloane Whitmore is actually Sandra Williams, a con artist who has been running this scheme for over a decade." Sloane's scream cut through the room, accusing Bethany of jealousy and lies. But Bethany held her ground, calmly pointing to the federal investigation, the arrest warrants, and the fact that law enforcement was already en route to the hotel. Just as if on cue, the ballroom doors swung open, and 4 officers, badges gleaming, stepped inside. Sloane's mask crumbled completely, replaced by terror. Franklin made a desperate dash for the exit, but was stopped cold by one of the officers. The room erupted into stunned silence and whispered conversations as the Whitmores were handcuffed and led away. Sloane, still screaming threats and curses, was escorted out, her carefully crafted life in ruins. Bethany watched, a quiet satisfaction settling over her. The night had been about humiliation, betrayal, and pain, but now it was about justice and the beginning of a new chapter. The stinky country girl had risen, and everyone had seen it. The ballroom was thick with stunned silence, broken only by the occasional murmur as guests absorbed the shocking scene unfolding before them. The Whitmores, Franklin, Delilah, and the woman once known as Sloane were being led away in handcuffs, their carefully constructed lives unraveling in real time. Bethany stood tall amidst the chaos, the weight of years of humiliation and invisibility lifting from her shoulders, replaced by a fierce sense of triumph. Garrett approached her hesitantly, his face pale and shaken. His eyes searched hers, looking for answers he hadn't sought before. "How did you know?" he asked quietly, voice cracking with disbelief. "How did you see through all of this?" Bethany met his gaze steadily, the years of silence and rejection finally breaking free. "I listened," she said simply. "I watched. I paid attention when no one else did." The truth hung heavy between them, two siblings who had drifted apart, now forced to confront the fractures of their shared past. Patricia appeared then, her usual confidence gone, replaced by uncertainty and regret. She approached Bethany slowly, eyes downcast. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I never imagined—" But Bethany cut her off, pulling out her phone and showing her the records, months of anonymous payments she had made to cover their mortgage, bills, and medical expenses. "You thought Garrett was supporting us," Bethany said, voice steady but soft. "You bragged to everyone about your generous son. It was me, all along." Patricia's lips trembled, tears welling in her eyes. Not the performative sobs Bethany had seen before, but real, heartfelt sorrow. Garrett knelt beside Bethany, holding out the antique necklace that had been the catalyst for the night's revelations. "This was always meant to be mine," he said, voice thick with emotion. "I didn't know Mum gave it away. I'm sorry." He placed the delicate pendant in her hand, the weight of it grounding and familiar. Bethany felt a strange calm settle over her. Forgiveness wasn't immediate, but something had shifted, a quiet understanding between siblings who had spent a lifetime feeling like strangers to each other. Her mother watched the exchange silently, tears streaming down her face, the walls she had built finally crumbling. As the guests began to disperse, uncertain and whispering, Bethany found herself near the bar, the remnants of the party lingering like a dream. The ice sculptures were melting. The champagne fountain still flowed, a bittersweet symbol of excess and illusion. The DJ, ever the optimist, started playing an upbeat tune, inviting the remaining guests to dance away the night's turmoil. Bethany allowed herself a small, wry smile. The party was over, but her life was beginning anew. She had shattered the illusion, exposed the lies, and reclaimed her place, not as the overlooked sister or the stinky country girl, but as a woman who had fought quietly and won. Later that night, as the hotel settled into a restless quiet, Bethany sat alone in her office, the city skyline glowing beyond the windows. The headlines already began to spread. The woman who owned the Monarch Hotel had exposed a high-profile fraud at a family engagement party. One headline even cheekily dubbed her the stinky country girl who owned the room. She'd framed that one, letting it serve as a reminder that sometimes the harshest labels could be badges of honor. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. There were wounds to heal, relationships to mend, and a family to rebuild from the ashes of betrayal. But for the first time in years, Bethany felt something she hadn't dared hope for before: peace, and the quiet assurance that she was finally where she belonged. In the quiet aftermath of the storm, Bethany sat alone in her sleek office overlooking the London skyline. The soft glow of the city lights filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the polished surfaces. For the first time in years, she felt an unfamiliar stillness, a fragile peace born from the chaos she had unleashed. Her mind replayed the night's events like a tense film. The laughter, the whispered insults, the betrayal of family, and finally the crushing revelation that had shattered illusions and exposed the Whitmores for the con artists they truly were. But beneath the triumph lay a deeper ache. The years of being dismissed, overlooked, and underestimated by the people who should have loved her unconditionally. She thought of Garrett, the brother who had stood beside Sloane so easily, blind to the truth until it was forced upon him. His apology had been genuine, his remorse clear in the way his eyes searched hers for understanding. Yet years of neglect and indifference couldn't be erased overnight. There was work to do, bridges to rebuild, and wounds to heal. Patricia's tears lingered in Bethany's memory. The woman who had once made her feel like a constant disappointment, now reduced to a fragile figure, grappling with regret. Bethany knew forgiveness would be a journey, not a single act. But beneath the surface, she sensed a flicker of hope, a chance to rewrite their story. Her phone buzzed softly on the desk, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Garrett. "Thank you. For everything. Can we start again?" Bethany smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached her eyes. She typed back simply, "Maybe we should." The door to her office opened gently, and Wesley Crane stepped in, clipboard in hand, his usual calm presence grounding her. "The morning meeting is ready," he said quietly. "Investors, partners, normal life, as you said." Bethany nodded, collecting herself. The world outside demanded business as usual, but inside she carried the weight of her triumph and the promise of a new beginning. Later that morning, in the bright sunlit restaurant of the Monarch Hotel, Bethany hosted a business breakfast. The room buzzed with conversation from investors and industry leaders, their polished voices a stark contrast to the raw emotions she had wrestled with the night before. As she prepared to speak, a nervous young woman entered quietly, eyes wide with awe at the elegant surroundings. The contrast was stark: simple clothes, practical ponytail, the unmistakable look of someone out of place in such grandeur. Before the whispers and judgments could take root, Bethany stood and extended her hand warmly. "Everyone, meet Nicole Patterson," she announced with genuine pride, this year's recipient of the Birch Hospitality Scholarship. Nicole grew up in a small town, worked 2 jobs to put herself through college, and will be starting at Cornell's hotel management program this fall. The room fell silent, and even the most entitled guests found themselves caught off guard. One brash investor, Gerald, made a rude comment, questioning who had allowed her in. Bethany's calm but firm presence silenced the room. She led Nicole to a seat at the head table, placing her among the very people who thought themselves above her. Nicole whispered thanks, overwhelmed but hopeful. Bethany smiled and said, "Don't thank me yet. The real work is just beginning. But remember this: the people who build the most beautiful things often start with nothing but stubbornness and dreams." As the breakfast continued, Bethany watched the guests with a quiet satisfaction. She was no longer the outsider, the overlooked country girl. She was a force to be reckoned with, a woman who had faced betrayal and humiliation and emerged stronger. Back in the hotel lobby later, Bethany observed the ebb and flow of guests, business travelers, families, tourists, all walking on the floor she owned, sleeping in the beds she'd paid for, unaware of the battles fought behind the scenes. She thought about the long road ahead, the challenges to come, and the family she was slowly learning to forgive. But for now, she let herself savor the moment, the calm after the storm, the quiet power of a woman who had risen from the shadows to claim her rightful place. The stinky country girl had come home, and this time, she wasn't going anywhere. The days following the scandal were a whirlwind of media attention, legal battles, and whispered conversations. Headlines plastered across newspapers and online forums referred to Bethany Burns, the stinky country girl, now a hotel magnate who had not only exposed a high-profile fraud, but also shattered the illusion of a perfect family. The nickname, once an insult, had become a badge of honor, one she wore quietly but proudly in her sleek London office. Despite the chaos, Bethany remained focused. The exposure of the Whitmore family's decade-long con was just the beginning. There were deeper layers to unravel, more secrets hidden beneath the glossy surface of wealth and privilege. She wasn't content to let the story end with arrests and headlines. She wanted justice, the kind that left no room for denial or escape. One afternoon, as rain pattered softly against the office windows, Wesley Crane entered with a folder tucked under his arm. "I've been digging," he said, voice low but urgent. "There's more on the Whitmores than we thought. Offshore accounts, shell companies registered under different names, even links to other fraudulent enterprises across Europe." Bethany leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "Show me everything." Together they pored over the documents, financial trails winding through multiple countries, tangled webs of false identities and money laundering. It was a sprawling network, but Bethany was determined to untangle every thread. Meanwhile, Garrett was tentatively stepping into a new role, not just as her brother, but as an ally. Their conversations grew longer, more honest. He confessed his regrets for the years he had overlooked her, for believing the polished lies instead of listening to the quiet truths. Bethany didn't rush forgiveness, but she allowed the door to open just a crack. At the same time, Patricia began attending therapy, a step toward understanding the pain she had caused and the complex emotions that had shaped their fractured family. Bethany watched cautiously, hopeful, but wary. Healing was never linear, especially when so much had been broken. In the midst of this, Bethany's thoughts often returned to the scholarship recipient, Nicole Patterson. The young woman's determination and humility reminded Bethany of herself years ago, someone underestimated but unyielding. Bethany had made a promise to herself to nurture talent like Nicole's, to create opportunities where none had existed before. One evening, as the hotel's grand lobby hummed with the quiet bustle of guests, Bethany received an unexpected call. The voice on the other end was clipped and professional. It was Agent Carla Reeves, the lead investigator on the Whitmore case. "We've uncovered something," Carla said. "Evidence pointing to a hidden asset, one that the Whitmores haven't disclosed. It could be the key to recovering some of the stolen funds." Bethany's pulse quickened. "Tell me everything." Carla explained that the Whitmores had invested in a property development in southern England under a false company name. If they could secure that asset, it might provide restitution for some of the victims. Bethany knew what this meant. The fight wasn't over. The Whitmores might have been caught, but their damage was far from undone. She would have to delve deeper, wield her influence, and use every resource at her disposal to ensure justice was served. As she hung up, Bethany looked out over the city lights once more. The road ahead was long and fraught with challenges, but she was ready. The stinky country girl who once felt invisible had transformed into a woman who commanded respect, with quiet strength and unyielding determination. Tonight, she would prepare for the next move. The game was far from finished, and Bethany Burns was only just beginning to play. Bethany sat late into the night in her office, the city's glow casting a soft halo around her. The discovery of the Whitmores' hidden property was a breakthrough, but it was also a reminder of how deep their deception ran. This wasn't just about stolen money. It was about dismantling a carefully constructed empire of lies that had preyed on the vulnerable for years. With Wesley's help, Bethany began coordinating with Agent Carla Reeves and her team, sharing information and strategizing the next steps. The legal proceedings were complex, tangled in layers of offshore accounts and false identities, but Bethany was unrelenting. She wasn't just fighting for justice, she was fighting to protect the future of her family and the countless victims of the Whitmores' fraud. Meanwhile, Garrett took tentative steps toward rebuilding his relationship with Bethany. He attended therapy sessions with their mother and reached out to Bethany more frequently, his tone less dismissive, more sincere. Their conversations, once strained and awkward, slowly became spaces of understanding and tentative hope. One afternoon, as Bethany reviewed contracts in the hotel's boardroom, a familiar face appeared. Nicole Patterson, the scholarship recipient, had come to visit. Nervous but determined, Nicole shared her dreams of making a difference in the hospitality industry, inspired by Bethany's story and resilience. Bethany smiled warmly, seeing herself reflected in the young woman's eyes. "Remember, Nicole," she said firmly, "the people who build the most beautiful things often start with nothing but stubbornness and dreams. Keep that fire alive." As the weeks passed, the Monarch Hotel became more than just a business. It was a symbol of quiet strength, resilience, and the power of perseverance. Bethany hosted events celebrating young talent, championing those who, like her, had been underestimated and overlooked. But beneath the surface, the battle against the Whitmore's legacy continued. Investigations uncovered more links to fraudulent schemes, and Bethany's influence helped bring new evidence to light. Each revelation tightened the noose around the con artist's empire, inching closer to justice for the victims. One evening, as Bethany prepared for a charity gala at the Monarch, she received a call from Agent Reeves. "We've secured the Southern England property," Carla reported. "It's now part of the restitution fund. The victims will finally see some of their money returned." Bethany allowed herself a rare moment of satisfaction. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but progress had been made. The stinky country girl had not only exposed the con artists, but was now helping to rebuild what they had broken. As the gala lights shimmered and guests mingled beneath the grand chandeliers, Bethany stood quietly, watching the crowd. She thought of the journey that had brought her here, the pain, the betrayal, the years of invisibility. And yet, here she was, stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever came next. The game had changed, and Bethany Burns was leading the way. The night of the charity gala at the Monarch Hotel was a turning point, not just for Bethany, but for everyone who had been touched by the Whitmore scandal. The grand ballroom sparkled with crystal and candlelight, filled with investors, philanthropists, and survivors who had come to witness the beginning of restitution and healing. The air buzzed with a mix of anticipation and cautious hope. Bethany moved through the crowd with quiet confidence, her presence commanding respect without a word. She greeted old allies and new faces alike, each conversation reinforcing the fragile threads of trust she was weaving back into her fractured family and community. Garrett was at her side more often these days, his support genuine, though tinged with the weight of remorse. As the evening progressed, Bethany took to the stage to address the guests. Her voice was steady, carrying the weight of someone who had endured betrayal and emerged stronger. She spoke not only of the Whitmore's downfall, but of resilience, justice, and the power of quiet strength. The applause was heartfelt, a tribute to the woman who had transformed adversity into triumph. But beneath the surface, tensions simmered. Not everyone in the room was pleased with the exposure and the consequences it brought. Bethany sensed subtle glances, whispered conversations that hinted at resentment and unease. The Whitmore's network had been vast, and their influence still lingered in shadows. Later that night, as the gala wound down and the last guests departed, Bethany received an anonymous note slipped under her office door. It was a stark warning, thinly veiled threats urging her to cease her pursuit of the Whitmore Empire's remnants. The message was clear. Some battles came with risks that could not be ignored. Bethany folded the note carefully, her expression unreadable. She was no stranger to danger, nor to the sacrifices required for justice. The path she had chosen was fraught with peril, but retreat was not an option. With renewed determination, she reached out to Agent Carla Reeves, sharing the threat and discussing security measures. The investigation would continue, but now with heightened vigilance. In the following days, Bethany intensified her efforts, leveraging every resource to dismantle the remaining pieces of the Whitmore's fraudulent empire. Each discovery was a blow to the con artist's legacy, a step closer to full accountability. Meanwhile, her relationship with Garrett deepened. The siblings, once strangers in their own family, began to rebuild trust through honest conversations and shared resolve. Patricia's journey toward understanding and healing continued, marked by small but meaningful changes. Bethany also invested more in mentoring young women like Nicole Patterson, creating opportunities to break cycles of invisibility and underestimation. Her work was no longer just about business. It was about legacy. The stinky country girl had become a beacon of resilience, justice, and quiet power. But as the shadows of the past threatened to reach her once more, Bethany knew this was far from the end. The final act was yet to come, and she was ready to face it head-on. The tension in the Monarch Hotel was palpable as Bethany prepared for what she knew would be the decisive moment in her fight against the Whitmore's legacy. Every detail had been meticulously planned, the evidence gathered, the legal teams coordinated, the allies in place. Tonight was not just about exposing the last threads of deception, it was about delivering justice that no one could ignore or undermine. The grand ballroom, once a stage for deceit and illusion, now felt like a battleground where truth would finally claim victory. Bethany stood near the back, her boots quietly tapping the marble floor, the weight of years of struggle resting on her shoulders, but not breaking her spirit. Around her, guests gathered, investors, survivors, law enforcement, and a community united by the desire to see the con artist's empire dismantled once and for all. Garrett was there, too, standing beside their mother Patricia, who carried herself with a humility that contrasted sharply with the woman she had been months before. There was a fragile hope in the air, a promise that this night could mark the beginning of real healing. As the clock struck the hour, Bethany stepped forward to address the crowd. Her voice was steady, carrying the quiet strength that had become her signature. She spoke of betrayal, resilience, and the power of truth to expose even the darkest lies. Then, with a subtle nod, she signaled Wesley, who activated the screens behind her. One by one, documents, photographs, and testimonies flashed across the screens, irrefutable evidence that left no room for doubt. The Whitmore's offshore accounts, fraudulent ventures, and false identities were all laid bare. The room held its breath as the weight of the truth settled over everyone. Suddenly, the ballroom doors swung open, and Agent Carla Reeves entered with a team of officers. They moved with purpose, ready to serve the final warrants that would bring the remaining conspirators to justice. Sloane, no longer a fiancé, but a fugitive, was among those arrested, her desperate pleas drowned out by the certainty of the law. The crowd erupted into stunned applause, a cathartic release of years of pain and injustice. Bethany allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. The stinky country girl had not just survived, she had conquered. As the officers led the last of the Whitmores away, Garrett approached Bethany, his eyes reflecting both sorrow and gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, "for never giving up on us." Bethany nodded, the years of silence between them finally breaking. "We're family," she said softly, "and family fights together." Patricia joined them, tears streaming down her face, a quiet apology in her eyes. The three of them stood together, a fragile but real beginning. Later, alone in her office, Bethany looked out over the city she had claimed, not just as a businesswoman, but as a woman who had reclaimed her identity and her worth. The nickname that once stung now felt like a battle cry. People would always try to make you feel small, she thought, but while they looked down, you could be rising, quietly, patiently, unstoppable. The stinky country girl had come home, and this time, she was here to stay.